A sharp buzz from my phone cut through the quiet of my kitchen, making me jump. It was late, past midnight, and I had just finished packing the last duffel bag for the trip. My name is Grace. I'm 68 years old, and I live in a small, cozy house in Lincoln, Nebraska, the same one my husband Arthur and I bought over 40 years ago. I picked up my phone, squinting at the bright screen. It was a message from my son, David. My heart gave a little flutter, thinking it might be a last-minute detail about the hiking trip, maybe even a sweet message about how excited the kids were. We were supposed to leave in 2 days for a week-long family vacation at a lodge in the Rocky Mountains, a trip I'd been planning and saving for years. But the words on the screen hit me like a splash of ice water. "Hey, Mom," it started, too casual for the late hour. "Look, about the trip. Sarah and I were talking, and she thinks it would be better if it was just her side of the family this time. You know, for bonding and stuff." I reread the sentence, my eyes scanning for a punchline, a typo, anything to make it less real. Her side of the family. My jaw went slack. Then came the kicker. "But seriously, thanks for doing your part by paying for everything. We really appreciate it. My part by paying. Not my part as a mother, not my part as a grandmother, not my part as a person who had spent 3 years meticulously planning every detail and saving every spare penny. Just a transaction. I was a human ATM, it seemed. I sat there at my kitchen table, the bright overhead light making the room feel stark and cold. All around me were the tangible proofs of my now shattered excitement. There was the pile of neatly folded hiking clothes, separated into bags labeled with each grandchild's name. Liam, age 10, Chloe, age 8, baby Noah, diapers and onesies. I had even packed a special bag of trail mix, each one personalized, with their favorite nuts and candies. My mind replayed David's message. Her side of the family. That phrase echoed in my head, a cold, clear bell tolling the end of my expectations. It wasn't just about being uninvited from a vacation. It was about being erased from a family moment I had imagined being central to. It was about being reduced to a financial contribution, nothing more. The emotional investment, the countless hours of planning, the sheer joy I had felt imagining those mountain mornings with my grandchildren, all of it dismissed, made irrelevant. A strange, hollow feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't just disappointment, it was a profound sense of betrayal. How could my own son, the boy I had raised, the man I had supported through thick and thin, deliver such a message so casually, so coldly, and through a text message, no less? Not even a phone call, not a face-to-face conversation, just a few lines of text, void of any real emotion or apology. I didn't respond. What was there to say? A part of me wanted to rage, to send back a furious message, to demand an explanation, but I knew it wouldn't change anything. It would only confirm their dismissive view of me. My silence felt more powerful, a quiet acknowledgement of their cruelty. My gaze drifted to the corner of the table where my old laptop sat, still open. The screen glowed softly, displaying the website of the Wilderness Lodge. I had spent countless hours on that site, poring over cabin layouts, hiking trails, and local attractions. The tab for the bank account I had set up specifically for this trip was still open too, showing a healthy balance. 3 years of scrimping and saving, of tutoring neighborhood kids and reading after I retired from my secretarial job, of foregoing little luxuries so I could create this one last, perfect memory with my family. All of it sitting there untouched, waiting for a trip I was now apparently not welcome on. I stared at the screen, the numbers blurring for a moment. The fund was still there, intact, and a new thought, sharp and clear, began to form in my mind, pushing through the initial shock and pain. If I wasn't going to be part of their memory, maybe I could create a new one, a different one. The quiet hum of my laptop was the only sound in the kitchen. I clicked on the travel folder, the one labeled Rocky Mountain Adventure, Family 2024, and watched as the files populated the screen. There were the flight bookings, 6 round-trip tickets from Omaha to Denver, all paid for. Then the cabin reservations, a sprawling lodge with 5 bedrooms, a huge stone fireplace, and a wraparound porch overlooking the peaks. Ski passes for 7, even though only 6 of them were actually going to ski. Fishing licenses for the men, mountain biking rentals for David and Sarah. Every single item, every single dollar paid for with my savings, all linked back to my name. I remembered the beginning of it all. It was about 5 years ago, shortly after Arthur passed. The house felt so empty without him, and I found myself just wandering from room to room, picking up his old sweaters, still smelling faintly of his pipe tobacco, and the outdoors. We had always talked about taking a big family trip, a real adventure, but life just kept getting in the way. Work, school, bills, you know how it goes. After he was gone, that dream suddenly felt so urgent, so important. I wanted to create one last amazing memory, something to bind us all together, something that Arthur would have loved. So I started the fund. I opened a separate savings account and called it Arthur's Adventure Fund. It wasn't much at first, just the loose change from my grocery runs, $5 or $10 here and there. Then I started tutoring. I'd always loved helping kids, and after 30 years as a school secretary, I knew a thing or two about getting them interested in reading. Word got around the neighborhood fast. Mrs. Grace was fair, patient, and her cookies were legendary. Soon I had a steady stream of little ones coming to my house a few afternoons a week. Every penny I earned from tutoring went straight into that fund. It was slow going, but every deposit felt like a step closer to making that dream a reality. I pictured us all there, laughing around a campfire, teaching the kids to fish, building snowmen. It was my way of keeping Arthur's spirit alive, of feeling close to him through the joy of our family. I scrolled down the list of names on the reservation confirmations. David and Sarah Miller, Sarah's sister Jessica and her husband Tom, Sarah's parents Brenda and Robert Hayes, and of course Liam, Chloe, and Noah. 8 booked guests, 8 people whose spots I had lovingly secured. My name wasn't there. It had been there, in the initial plans, in the early discussions, but somewhere along the way, it had been quietly removed. The phone rang, jarring me from my thoughts. It was Sarah, my daughter-in-law. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Grace? Oh, good, you picked up. Her voice was bright, almost too cheerful, like she was trying to sell me something. Listen, about the trip. I just wanted to make sure you got David's text. We felt really bad about it, honestly. You felt bad? I asked, trying to keep my voice even. Oh, totally. We were like, poor Grace, she's done so much for us. She really deserves a break. So we just thought you'd want to relax instead. You know, not have to deal with all the fuss of traveling with kids and all that mountain air. It can be a lot for, someone your age. Someone your age. The thinly veiled concern was almost comical if it weren't so insulting. She wasn't fooling anyone. This wasn't about my comfort. It was about their convenience. It was about her family and me, the payer, being neatly removed from the picture. I appreciate your concern, Sarah, I said, my voice flatter than I intended. But I had actually been looking forward to the fuss and the mountain air. There was a beat of awkward silence on her end. Oh, well, we just thought, it's a lot, and we really want to bond as a family, just our little unit, She meant her little unit. I understand, I said, and I truly did. I understood perfectly. They wanted the benefits of the trip without the burden of my presence. It was a clear, calculated omission. This wasn't an oversight. It was a deliberate removal. We said our goodbyes, a polite but hollow exchange, and I hung up the phone. The cheerful tone of her voice still echoed in my ears, making me feel even more invisible. I closed the travel folder on my laptop. The dream I had carefully nurtured, the memory I had hoped to create, had been twisted into something ugly and transactional. That night, sleep didn't come easy. I tossed and turned, replaying the conversation, David's text, all the small slights and dismissals I had overlooked in the past. But somewhere in the darkness, a new idea began to take root. It wasn't about anger or revenge, not really. It was about seeing things clearly. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to be used, not anymore. I got out of bed, padded silently to the kitchen, and opened my laptop again. This time, I didn't open the travel folder. I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed a title, The Unseen Women. And then I started to write a list. Not of grievances, not of all the ways I felt hurt, but of names. Names of women I knew, women who had given so much of themselves, quietly, tirelessly, without ever really being seen or appreciated for it. Women like me. The next morning, the sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light into my kitchen. I hadn't slept much, but my mind felt clearer, sharper than it had in years. The list I'd started the night before lay open on the table beside my laptop. It was longer now, filled with names that had come to me in the quiet hours. Neighbors, old colleagues, women from my church. Women who, like me, had poured their hearts into others, only to find themselves overlooked. I logged into the travel fund account. The screen glowed with the familiar layout, confirming my sole ownership. Every expense, every booking, every single dollar transaction for that mountain lodge trip was linked directly to my name, my bank. There was no shared access, no secondary account holder. It was all mine. With a steady hand, I navigated to the transaction options. I wasn't looking to cancel anything just yet. That would be too quick, too obvious. No, I wanted them to feel it, to understand the consequence of their actions not through words, but through experience. I found the option to schedule a transaction freeze. I set it to trigger at exactly 8:15 a.m. Eastern Time, 2 days from now. That, I calculated, would be precisely when David and his family would be at the airport gate in Denver, ready to board their flight to the lodge's nearest regional airport. That's when the cards would start declining. I closed the laptop, a strange sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't about malice. It was about boundaries. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not just the money, but my dignity. Later that morning, I sent a short, soft text message to David. Hope you all have an easy journey. Let me know if you need any help with the kids' bags at the airport. I added a simple smiley face. It was a final olive branch, a test. Would he respond with even a shred of concern for me? Or would he continue to treat me as an afterthought? No reply came. Not a word. The silence spoke volumes. The next day passed slowly, a quiet anticipation building inside me. I made myself a simple dinner, read a book, and tried to distract myself, but my mind kept drifting back to the clock, counting down the hours. The morning of the trip arrived, cold and clear. I woke early, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat by my kitchen window, watching the sunrise paint the sky with streaks of pink and orange. It was exactly 8:15 a.m. on the East Coast. I imagine them now bustling through the airport, perhaps a little stressed with the kids, but excited, oblivious. They'd be at the gate, probably trying to buy some last-minute snacks or drinks, or perhaps checking their bags for the final leg of the journey to the mountains. My phone, which I had placed on the table beside my tea, began to buzz. Then again, and again, calls from David, texts from Sarah. I didn't pick up. I didn't even look at the screen. I just sipped my tea, the warmth spreading through me, and watched a cardinal land on the bird feeder outside. I knew exactly what was happening on the other end. First, a small inconvenience, a credit card declining for a coffee or a magazine. Then perhaps another card for the small rental van they had reserved to get from the regional airport to the lodge. Then the big ones, the lodge itself, the ski equipment outfitter, the fishing guide. All those carefully planned, fully paid for reservations, suddenly unraveling. The system was doing its work just as I had planned. The funds were still there, untouched, but inaccessible to them. The phone buzzed again. This time, a rapid succession of messages. I could practically hear the panic in the vibrations. I imagined David, red-faced and frustrated, Sarah with that thin, overly cheerful veneer cracking, her parents looking on, probably confused. It was a scene I had no desire to witness firsthand, but it played out vividly in my mind's eye. I felt no satisfaction, no glee, just a quiet sense of justice. They had reduced me to a transaction, and now the transaction was gone. The money was still mine, safe in my account, but their access to it had been severed, just as they had severed my connection to their family vacation. The silence from me, the lack of explanation, was the only response they would get. It was the only answer they truly deserved. The phone had finally stopped buzzing by mid-afternoon. A strange, almost peaceful quiet settled over my house. I spent the day tending to my small garden, pulling weeds, and pruning the rose bushes. It was a good, honest kind of work, grounding me. Then the emails started. One by one, they popped into my inbox. The first was from the Mountain Lodge. Refund confirmation, booking ID, masked for privacy. A full refund for the sprawling cabin. Then an email from the excursion booking company. Ski lift passes, refund processed. Another for the ski instructor deposit. Even the small deposit for the fishing guide came back. It was all returning to me, every penny, the same way it had left. The money, instead of being spent on a family that had dismissed me, was now flowing back into my account. A silent reaffirmation of my decision. I didn't open the bank app to check the balance. I didn't need to. I trusted the system. What I did open was my messaging app. There was a text from David. It was long, rambling, and vague. Mom, what happened? Everything just got canceled at the airport. It was a nightmare. Sarah's so upset. The kids are crying. I don't understand. The cards just kept declining. It messed everything up. Can you maybe look into it? We need to fix this. It's a huge problem. We were really looking forward to it. And, maybe consider returning the deposit we gave? We really need that back to figure things out. I read the message twice. What happened? As if he had no idea. Fix everything. As if I was still his personal fixer. And then the audacity, returning the deposit we gave. A quiet, almost breathy laugh escaped me. A deposit? From them? There had never been a deposit, not a single cent. It had all been mine. Every single reservation, every single expense had been paid for entirely by me. This wasn't just entitlement. It was an attempt at manipulation, a complete rewriting of history. They weren't even trying to hide their self-interest anymore. There was no apology for their dismissive text, no genuine concern for how I might have felt, no insight into their own actions, just a desperate request for money to bail them out of a situation they had created. I didn't bother to reply. There was nothing to say. Their lack of introspection, Their continued belief that I was simply a resource to be tapped solidified my resolve. My quiet revenge wasn't about making them suffer, not really. It was about setting myself free. I picked up my notebook, the one with the list of the unseen women, and opened it to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote a new title, bolder this time, The Forgotten Women. Underneath it, I started writing. I added the names I had thought of last night, but now, with the refunds flowing in, a new purpose for that money was forming, crystal clear. There was Agnes from my book club. Her husband had passed away nearly 10 years ago, and her daughter, who lived out of state, only ever seemed to call around tax season or when she needed a loan. Agnes was always so cheerful, always baking cookies for everyone, but I knew she hadn't left our county in decades. Her life had shrunk to the four walls of her house and the grocery store. Then there was Martha, a retired nurse from the hospital where Arthur had spent his last days. She had been a godsend during that difficult time, always offering a kind word, a warm blanket, a listening ear. She lived alone now, her children grown and moved far away, and I knew she struggled with loneliness. She spent her days volunteering at the local animal shelter, pouring her compassion into the stray cats and dogs. She deserves so much more. I thought of Eleanor, my old neighbor, whose son had convinced her to invest her entire life savings in a questionable scheme that had promptly collapsed, leaving her financially strapped and too proud to ask for help. She worked part-time at the library, dusting shelves, her hands gnarled with arthritis, but her mind still sharp and vibrant. The list grew. Women who had poured themselves out for others, often thanklessly. Women who had been taken for granted, whose contributions had been overlooked, whose dreams had been deferred or forgotten. My own experience, as painful as it was, had opened my eyes to a quiet epidemic of unseen sacrifice. The money from the refunds, the money that was supposed to be for a trip that excluded me, now had a new, more meaningful purpose. It would be used to see these women, to acknowledge them, to make them feel chosen. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of quiet planning, energized by this new purpose. The refunded money sat comfortably in my account, a silent testament to a different kind of freedom. My list, The Forgotten Women, grew longer with each passing day. I narrowed it down to 6 names, women I felt a strong connection to, women who truly deserved a break, a moment to just be. The phone calls were the hardest part. How do you tell someone out of the blue that you want to take them on a trip, fully paid for, just because you think they deserve it? It sounded almost too good to be true, like a scam. My first call was to Agnes. Agnes, it's Grace Miller. Grace, well, this is a nice surprise, she said, her voice always so warm. I'm calling because, well, I've decided to take a little trip, and I was hoping you might join me. There was a pause. A trip? For me? Grace, what are you talking about? A little retreat up in the Adirondacks. A nice cabin, good food, just some quiet time away from everything. But why me? Her voice was tinged with suspicion, and I couldn't blame her. Because you matter, Agnes, I said, and the words felt so true, so right. You've given so much to everyone around you, and sometimes those of us who give the most are the first to be forgotten. And you shouldn't be forgotten. There was a long silence on the other end, and I thought she might hang up. Then I heard a small sniffle. Oh, Grace, that's the kindest thing anyone has said to me in years. One by one, I called the others. Martha, the retired nurse, was initially hesitant, worried she'd be a burden. Eleanor, my old neighbor, was convinced I had won the lottery and was just being generous. Mary, a single mother I knew from my volunteering days, worried about her job and her kids. Patricia, A distant cousin who had lost her husband unexpectedly felt she couldn't leave her house, and Susan, a quiet woman from my church who had spent her life caring for an ailing parent and now found herself alone, was just stunned into silence. Each time I patiently explained. This wasn't a charity, it was an invitation, an acknowledgement. Because you deserve it, I'd say. Because you matter, and you shouldn't be forgotten. It was a mantra that resonated deep within me, words I needed to hear as much as they did. Slowly, cautiously, each woman agreed. With the invitations accepted, I turned my attention to the details. The mountain lodge trip might have been canceled, but the spirit of it, the essence of a restorative getaway, was still alive. I booked a beautiful lakeside cabin retreat in the Adirondacks, far from the bustling ski resorts. It was smaller, cozier, with comfortable bunk rooms, a large screened-in porch perfect for morning coffee, and easy walking trails right outside the door. No strenuous hikes, no elaborate itineraries, just peace. I arranged for a local chef from a nearby town to come in and cook simple, delicious comfort food, hearty breakfasts, comforting dinners. No fancy cuisine, just good, wholesome meals that made you feel cared for. I even found a folk guitarist who played the kind of gentle, familiar songs that transport you back to simpler times. As a special touch, I found an old photo of Arthur. He was holding a camp lantern, his face lit by its warm glow, a genuine smile on his lips. It was taken on one of our early camping trips, decades ago. I had it enlarged and printed, then wrapped it gently in one of his favorite old flannel shirts, the one that smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. He wouldn't be there in person, but his spirit, the one that had inspired this whole endeavor, would be. This trip, I realized, wasn't just for these women. It was for Arthur, and it was for me. It was about reclaiming joy, creating new memories, and finally, truly seeing. The day arrived, bright and clear, much like the one I had planned for David's family. But this time, the anticipation was different. It wasn't a nervous energy, but a deep, quiet joy. I'd rented a comfortable passenger van, and I drove it myself to pick up each woman. As they climbed in one by one, their initial shyness slowly gave way to nervous smiles and a shared sense of wonder. Instead of elaborate leis, I handed each of them a matching, hand-knit scarf I'd bought from a local artisan. They were soft, warm, and felt like a hug. "Oh, Grace, this is lovely," Agnes murmured, running her hand over the wool. Martha gave a small gasp of delight when she saw the cozy interior of the van. The drive to the Adirondacks was filled with a gentle chatter. We pointed out sights along the way, shared easy laughter, and slowly a comfortable camaraderie began to form. When we finally pulled up to the lakeside cabin, a collective sigh of contentment swept through the van. It was even more beautiful than the pictures, nestled among the trees, with a wide, welcoming porch overlooking the still, clear lake. We settled in, choosing our bunk rooms, oohing and eyeing over the details. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the tree line, we gathered on the screened-in porch, sipping mulled cider warmed on the stove. The local chef, a cheerful woman named Brenda, had prepared a delicious, hearty stew, its aroma filling the air. We toasted each other with the steaming cider, the clinking of our mugs sounding like tiny bells. "To new beginnings," Eleanor proposed, her eyes sparkling. "To being seen," Martha added softly, and a ripple of agreement went around the table. I placed Arthur's framed photo, still wrapped in his flannel shirt, at the center of the large dining table. The lantern he held seemed to cast a warm, comforting glow over us all. No one asked me to move it. Instead, Agnes reached out and gently touched the frame. "He had a kind face, Grace," she said. Patricia nodded, a quiet understanding in her eyes. It felt right, having him there, a silent, benevolent presence. Later after dinner, we moved outside to the fire pit. The air was cool and crisp, and the flames danced, casting long shadows. The folk guitarist, a quiet man named Samuel, played gentle melodies on his acoustic guitar, songs from our youth, familiar and comforting. We hummed along, some of us even singing softly, the words coming easily to our lips. Each night we gathered around that fire pit. I had brought an old camp lantern, similar to the one Arthur held in the photo, and each night one woman would light the lantern, holding it up, letting its light illuminate her face. And in that soft glow, she would speak the words she had never been allowed to say, the feelings she had long suppressed. Agnes went first. Her voice trembled at first, but grew stronger. I mattered. I gave. I remember all the sacrifices I made for my daughter, the way I poured myself into her life. And even if she doesn't see it now, I remember. Martha spoke of the patients she'd cared for, the late nights, the emotional toll, the quiet despair when her own children drifted away. I gave my whole heart to my profession, to others' pain, and I deserved to be recognized for that. I remember. Eleanor, usually so reserved, recounted the pain of being financially exploited, the shame she had carried. I gave my trust, my hopes, and I felt so foolish when it was taken, but I remember my own strength, my own resilience. There were no posed photos, no forced smiles for social media, just spontaneous laughter that bubbled up from deep within, and soft, knowing moments of belonging, moments when a hand reached out to squeeze another's in silent understanding, when tears flowed freely but without judgment. It was a space where we could just be, unburdened by expectations, unbound by the roles society had placed upon us. Here, in the quiet heart of the Adirondacks, we were simply women, seen, heard, and deeply, truly appreciated. We were 3 days into our retreat, and the mountain air had worked its magic. The women were transformed. The initial hesitancy had melted away, replaced by an easy camaraderie, genuine laughter, and a surprising openness. We had spent the morning walking easy trails, spotting deer, and listening to the rustle of leaves. Later, Agnes and Martha were teaching Eleanor a new card game on the screened-in porch, their voices light and happy. My phone, which I had mostly ignored, buzzed with an email notification. It was from David. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity, a small persistent thing, got the better of me. The subject line was simply, "Urgent, need your help." I opened it. It was another long, rambling message, filled with vague apologies and desperate pleas. "Mom, I'm so sorry about everything. We really messed up. The trip was a disaster, obviously. Sarah's still so mad, and the kids are so disappointed. We don't know what to do. Can you please reconsider? We really need your help to fix this. Maybe you could send us some money for a new trip, or at least help us cover some of the losses from the canceled bookings. We're in a really tight spot." There was still no genuine apology, no real insight into the pain they had caused, no acknowledgement of their own hurtful actions, just a request for money, a transaction, again. It was as if nothing had changed, as if their world revolved solely around their immediate needs, and I was merely a resource to fulfill them. I closed the email without replying. The screen went dark, and with it, any lingering sliver of hope that they might understand, that they might suddenly see me as more than a provider. But surprisingly, the realization didn't sting. It simply was. I put my phone down and walked out to the dock, a warm shawl wrapped around my shoulders, a mug of steaming coffee in my hand. The lake was calm, reflecting the soft morning light. Susan was already there, quietly feeding birds from her hand, a gentle smile on her face as a tiny chickadee landed on her outstretched palm. Patricia was a few feet away, sketching the serene lake with charcoal on a canvas, her brow furrowed in concentration, completely absorbed in her art. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. I sat on the edge of the dock, letting my legs dangle over the water, and just watched them. These women, who had come here feeling invisible, forgotten, were now vibrant, engaged, seen. They were not sad. They were not dwelling on the past. They were living, creating, connecting. In that stillness, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature and the gentle presence of these new friends, a profound sense of peace settled over me. It wasn't the peace of resignation, but the peace of liberation. I took a deep breath, the mountain air filling my lungs, and spoke the words aloud, my voice soft but clear. I'm not sad anymore. The sadness, the pain of rejection, the ache of feeling unseen, it had all lifted, replaced by something warm and sustaining. My peace wasn't dependent on their remorse, on their understanding, or on their belated apologies. It was rooted in this new community I had found, in the laughter shared, in the stories told, in the simple, undeniable fact that I had chosen to be seen, to be valued, and to extend that value to others. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I was choosing, and that made all the difference. On the final night of our retreat, a quiet magic settled over the cabin. We gathered on the dock, the air crisp and clear, the stars beginning to pepper the darkening sky. I had bought a package of small biodegradable paper lanterns, the kind you light and set afloat on water. Tonight, I said, my voice soft but carrying in the stillness, we're going to let go of what we no longer need to carry. Each woman was given a lantern and a small slip of paper. The instructions were simple. Write one thing you're releasing, one burden you're finally shedding. Agnes, her eyes bright, wrote guilt on her slip, a silent testament to years of feeling she hadn't done enough, been enough. Martha carefully wrote bitterness, a word she had carried for far too long, like a stone in her pocket. Eleanor wrote invisibility, and her hand trembled slightly as she did. Mary, the single mom, wrote shame, for all the times she felt judged for her struggles. Patricia wrote grief, a heavy weight she had clung to since her husband's passing, believing it was the only way to keep him close. And Susan, ever so quietly, wrote fear, the fear of being alone, of not being enough. One by one, they lit their lanterns, the small flames flickering to life, chasing away the encroaching darkness. With solemn faces, they walked to the edge of the dock and gently set their lanterns afloat on the still black surface of the lake. We watched in silence as the tiny lights drifted away, tiny beacons against the vastness, carrying their burdens out into the mist. It wasn't sad, it was profound. Finally, it was my turn. I took the last lantern, its paper cool against my fingers. On my slip, I wrote, I release the weight of being unchosen. For so long, I had yearned for their validation, for their acknowledgement, for them to choose me. But here, with these women, I had found my own worth, independent of anyone else's approval. I lit my lantern and set it on the water, watching it join the others, a cluster of gentle lights slowly moving away. We stood there for a long time, not crying, but truly free. The air felt lighter, the silence deeper, more meaningful. As we walked back to the cabin, the path lit by the soft glow of our flashlights, Mary, the single mom, broke the quiet. This feels like coming home, she said, her voice filled with a quiet wonder. I nodded, a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with the cool night air. My heart wasn't full of regret or bitterness or loss. It was full of arrival. I had arrived at a new place, not just physically, but emotionally, a place where I was seen, where I belonged, where I had found a family not by blood, but by choice. I was no longer waiting to be chosen. I had chosen myself, and in doing so, had created a space for others to be chosen too. And that, I realized, was the most profound adventure of all,